Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Happy New Year. Welcome to everyone. We're going to do a Sufi version of the Year in Review 2023. Okay. But this is not going to be like Sports Illustrated, Athlete of the Year, or Time Man of the Year, or whatever feminist magazine is out there, Woman of the Year. We're going to talk about problems of the year. Okay? And we're going to start, always we start in the name of Allah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, if I forgot, Astaghfirullah. Okay, so we're trying to channel truth here, Haqq, not all the mind productions out there. We're going to start with a variant on a quote from the most famous British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, who said, "Never in the history of human endeavor have so few done so much for so many." The variant, that's 1940s. The variant today is, never in the history of human endeavor have so many been lied to by so many others for the advantage and under the instruction of so few. And I'm serious. I just passed my 77th birthday and I have never seen so much lying, mischief, spinning, cherry picking, hiding, covering up of data and information as in the current epoch. It's unreal in all fields. We're kind of used to it in politics, but now it's gotten into medicine and science, and I'm sure it's there in the arts as well. Lying, spinning, cherry picking, distorting, covering up. That is the real pandemic that is going on. And it's very hard for people to know what to believe. But I think it's obligatory for us to try to figure it out, even if everyone is trying to lie. And I'm convinced it's possible. But you have to drop a lot of your belief systems because most of them have been appropriated from elsewhere. They're not really yours. People think their ideas are their own, but this is a myth. All you have to do is travel around the world and you can see all these echo chambers. The French think this about that situation. The Arabs think that. I won't include the Jews here because the Jews are allowed to think differently, but a lot of the Jews, especially the secular ones, they also have their own echo chamber. So most of what we're thinking isn't ours, really. They tell us that we're taught critical thinking in the school. That's another lie. And even the people who say they're teaching critical thinking, they're teaching the students what to criticize. I saw a local TV program. The teacher was very proud of teaching critical thinking. And when they asked people what they were criticizing, it was all the mainstream propaganda. They're criticizing climate change and they're criticizing vaccine hesitancy and they're criticizing... That's not critical thinking. But in all fairness, we may be using the wrong term, critical thinking. We should be thinking in terms of discriminating thinking, discerning thinking, not just criticizing. We have people now, I see there are seminars by the famous Noam Chomsky on critical thinking, but all he does is criticize America. America can never do anything right. That's not the original idea of critical thinking. You have to be able to, there's a good term in Yiddish actually that I really like, verginning. Verginning is allowing the enemy, the other side, its qualities, its truths. not just black and white thinking. So many of these people who say they're critical thinkers, they aren't. They're just criticizing thinkers. They see all the bad in a lot of the mainstream stuff going on, politics especially. There's plenty of stuff to criticize in other areas as well. Medicine has been particularly outstanding in terms of the stuff that can be criticized during that entire COVID catastrophe, starting from the beginning. Gain of function research that generated this virus that gave us the pandemic that was started in America. So Trump and Echo Times and all of them, Epoch Times, sorry, they got that one wrong when they called it the China virus, because it was all developed in the United States. The research was done in the United States. When it became prohibited to do it, they shifted it to the Wuhan lab, still financed by America. So it's wrong to call this this was a true China-US collaboration in an era where they're supposed to be completely at odds with each other. Okay. So we're confronted with the situation of lies all around us. And what are we supposed to do? Okay. Well, first of all, I think the first step is awareness always. Look at what's going on in your mind. Most of it is batil, is false, because it comes from false sources. So you can't trust your mind. I love to quote Byron Katie on this, who says, all your problems come from one place. You believe in the contents of your own mind. Okay. Sheikh Nazim taught us the same thing. He called them mind productions. But now we have a logarithmic expansion of mind productions, because now we have to become aware that many of these mind productions are collective mind productions, not only individual, collective. They're part of what you assimilated from your community or your nationality or your religion or your ethnic background. These are collective mind productions. They have a few different names now. Sometimes they're called echo chambers. I like that term. Sometimes they're called ideological bubbles. Sometimes they're called groupthink. And there's lots of it around. Watch your postings on the current Middle East situation. If it's a Muslim name, you know what they're saying in advance. Okay, they've all assumed the ideology of their echo chamber. Almost all. Very, very few critical ones. I saw one that's which goes against this, which is worth looking into. Look at the interviews of the son of the Hamas founder. I don't remember his name. He broke with it. He couldn't deal with their level of cruelty and brutality. He couldn't deal with it. So now he's in hiding. This is also, there's a Jewish-Muslim difference here, because the Jews are allowed to criticize Israel, but the Gazans are not allowed to criticize Hamas. And most of the Muslims are wont to criticize Hamas. One of the most disappointing parts of the current debate about what's going on between Israel and Gaza and Hamas is the fact that Muslims are very wont to criticize Hamas. You almost won't find it, very occasionally. In fact, they'll defend, these atrocities didn't exist. They now have videotapes of them, plus multiple witnesses. They didn't exist. Like 9/11 wasn't done by those Al-Qaeda terrorists. No, it must have been done by, God only knows. Mossad is one of the favorite of the conspiracy theory. CIA is second, American government is third. But we're not talking about conspiracy theories. But sometimes the conspiracy theories become part of the group think. So in Pakistan, up to the present time, the majority of people think that was America or Israel who did 9/11. They still can't connect the dots. Okay, this is called groupthink, and it's in all of our interests, and even paradoxically in the interest of our group, that we break with this kind of groupthink and try to see the reality. As Muslims, that's what we're supposed to do. It's called basira, or sometimes ilham, or fuad. There are a lot of terms for discriminating thinking, discerning thinking, furqan. A lot of Arabic words, but people aren't using it. So when I originally talked, actually, about this whole question, it goes way back. I was looking at my first posting on my blog. It's an article that I still recommend to everyone. There's one comment on it. It was posted in November 2016, more than 7 years ago. And it tells almost the whole story, still one comment. By my ex, may Allah bless her and reward her and protect her. Okay. No, and even if there were comments, they would sound something like this. Well, that's your opinion. It's an interesting opinion. There's some creative thinking. No, that's not right. That's part of the democratic echo chamber. Oh, that's your opinion. You have an interesting opinion. This guy has an interesting opinion. That guy has an interesting opinion. That's also echo chamber stuff. Collective groupthink. No. Sometimes what we say is inspired, insightful, ilham in Arabic. It's truth. And if you want to get out of this quagmire, you have to be able to see that truth. You can't just repeat what's in your own ideological bubble. You'll never get there. So thinking is part of the problem. Most people are trying to solve the problem by thinking, but actually thinking is part of the problem. And that's the number one problem. What I call false epistemology. Now, epistemology sounds like a mouthful. It's a Greek word originally, but it's very simple. It means, specifically, it's defined as the theory of knowledge, but that's also too abstract. It means, how do you get to what is really going on? How do you access the reality? And you need that in every area of your life. Whether it's how you're going to deal with a medical issue, or how you're going to deal with a problematic child, or where you're going to travel. All of this requires epistemology. What you're going to believe in, which religion you're going to practice, what political theory you're going to adopt, God forbid. Okay, all of this comes down to epistemology. Look it up. Study it. Don't just listen to this tape as another spiritual entertainment. Research it, think about it, study it. When the COVID epidemic first came out, one of the doctors, it was a French doctor. The French were on top of this right away, mashallah. I don't usually expect that because they're usually the most intellectual, but they were on top of this right away. First of all, there was Luc Montagnier, Nobel Prize laureate for discovering the virus connected with AIDS. He looked at the sequence. This is the end of January 2020. Check the schedule. And he says, there's no doubt this is from a lab. And the entire French medical establishment and the world medical establishment jumps on him. He's an old fool. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's lost it. No, he was spot on. Right away. It was the end. For me, dossier closed. The seal of the evidence. The Nobel Prize winning virologist looked at the sequence of the coronavirus and he said, this is lab made. End of story. You don't need 6 years of congressional hearings and studies and papers and prestigious journals. It's over. The other person who impressed me early on in the COVID situation was Dr. Didier Raoult. Never know which name comes first, Raoult Didier or Didier Raoult. But Didier Raoult And he said, I don't get it. He said, in my hospital, we have 50% less mortality than in the general hospitals in France. Why aren't they listening to me? So the interviewer asked, how come you understood what no one else did? He said, because I studied epistemology. Everyone else is studying epidemiology. Got that in trouble with epidemiology. No, still don't got it right. Anyway, the science of the causes and distribution of diseases. The epidemiologists. That's it. Sorry, confused between epistemology and epidemiology. One of my best friends from high school is an epidemiologist. We've had a few discussions over the years. Everyone's looking at the epidemiologists. Why? Because the epidemiologists are the bean counters. They're the data crunchers. They take all this enormous amount of data and they put it into their statistical analysis and they do a few different mental maneuvers and they come up with the reality. But they got it wrong regularly on this subject because data is not the way to go. Now that's going to be a shock for a lot of you, especially if you're lovers of science, but data is not the way to go. You just get lost. In fact, I believe that there's a law like there is in economics, the law of diminishing returns in investment in economics. You learn that in Economics 101. There's the law of diminishing returns of data. At some point, if you have more data, you get less information, you get lost. In fact, in my epistemology, anecdotes are better than scientific studies. Now, it's going to be a shock even to all of my friends and associates in the vaccine hesitancy movement. You know, it's going to be a shock. But a lot of these double-blind, placebo-controlled trials are biased. I tell the story when I was teaching psychiatry at the Douglas Hospital and the McGill University Network. They asked me to do a course on research in psychiatry, which I willingly accepted. And one of the first paper, not the first, but a few papers down, when I was reading about it, I came across this brilliant article by a researcher who just took the 100 most popular articles published in the most prestigious journals, read by the most prestigious people. And he looked up the author's background without even looking at the conclusion and predicted based on his academic background what his conclusion would be. And none of the 100 papers, none of them went against what you could have predicted by the author's prior bias. That's science. Objective science. I must say that the worst of these people, and I hope the psychologists won't get offended, are the CBT people. They have mastered the art of designing research to get the results you want. I wonder whether Fauci consulted them to do his studies, if he did any studies. They can solve, with CBT, they'll solve everything from an itching toe to schizophrenia, and they'll design a study to show you how it works. I got to give one anecdote here to show you what I mean, and then we'll move on to what are the major problems besides mind productions. So one of my specialties at some point in time was treating chronic fatigue syndrome. Very difficult, very difficult. Usually doesn't show up on any of the objective tests. So I was looking around and I had a few clients who were refused their salary insurance, citing a study of a research doctor in England called Isaac Marks, where he's using CBT to cure chronic fatigue syndrome. Made no sense to me whatsoever. I sent many people to CBT. It helped very minimally, occasionally. He had a study to show that it was, I don't remember the detail, but highly effective for chronic. Didn't make any sense. So in England, they're very politically astute and energetic. So they did, the Chronic Fatigue Association in England did a questionnaire for their members. They had about 5,000 members, of which I think something like 250 had done CBT, and they said, did it help you this much? What happened? And in their study, they found that 6% were helped, 22% were harmed, doesn't surprise me, by the CBT, and the vast majority were completely unaffected. So what's going on? So they started getting pretty upset with Dr. Marks. The last conference I went to, they told me he was in hiding because he was getting death threats. I'm not surprised. These people are deprived of their medical insurance, which is their survival, because of a false research paradigm that's proving something that doesn't exist. You cannot seriously treat chronic fatigue syndrome with CBT. So that kind of turned me off. Although CBT can be useful in a lot of other situations, and I'm sure I use it or some of their concepts. And I love the work of Aaron Beck and cognitive therapy of depression. So I'm not dissing CBT, but I'm dissing their biased research. Okay. The psychoanalysts don't even do much research because they're so convinced in their method. But that's another story for another time. Okay, so we have... So the top of the pyramid of the problems of our time is believing in mind productions, believing in thought. And if you want to pursue that, I wrote an article, as I said, 7 years ago on my blog, SufiPilgrimsProgress.com, called The Process of Deprogramming from the Cult of the Intellect. Have a look at it. It's only a start, but it will get you started. Okay, now what does this give? Okay, what do you get from these false mind productions? What are the major problems? First, so we're going to define 3 major problems in the world and 2 minor ones. Okay, the first one, I have to argue sometimes with some of my Quebecois friends that the most important politics is not, even if you're living in Quebec, Quebec politics or Canadian politics. The most important politics in the world is American politics. Because what's happening in America is infecting the good Freudian slip. I was going to say infecting the rest of the world. So that pandemic is 90% American, not Chinese. They just did the final straw and negligently, I believe, released the virus. But America did all the groundwork first. So the dysfunctional American politics is affecting the entire world. I'm sure a lot of Muslims will be on board. Yeah, Iraq, Afghanistan, true. Israel, okay, true to some extent. But it's more than that. Everything that we're suffering. The inequality of wealth in the world. The billionaires, what they now call control-oligarchs. We'll get to that in a second. That's the second biggest problem. They're all coming from dysfunctional American politics. All based on some initial principles that sounded good. Due process of the law. Adversarial system. Checks and balances. Americans, lawyers and politicians, are all very proud of it. What has it all led to? Paralysis. Watch the Congress, watch the Republicans and Democrats denouncing each other. America is in a form of paralysis. The Houthis are attacking them in the Red Sea, and they're not really doing anything serious about it. They were neglecting. An intelligent American government could have easily prevented the Ukraine war. Could have probably prevented the Middle Eastern war also. But America is in a dysfunctional state. And I won't even hazard a guess about an idea about how to solve it. But I think we have to go Republican on some level or another, because the liberals have totally lost it. And that is the second major problem. So first major problem in the world, dysfunctionality of American politics. Second major problem of the world, woke culture. The liberals, who used to be liberal, have now become autocratic with their woke culture. And you'll run into this all over the place, this woke culture. Okay. Cancel culture. Censorship culture. And there's a lot of three-letter words, three-letter acronyms, WEF, World Economic Forum, ESG, Environmental and Social Governance, DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, etc., etc., etc. Klaus Schwab, World Health Organization, all these globalistic structures that are trying to control us. America, which was based on freedom, has now become the place of censorship, of being canceled. Harvard, its great educational institution, was voted, of all the academic institutions in the United States, voted least free speech, rating 0 free speech at Harvard. You might have seen their president fumbling herself and stuttering and not knowing how to answer simple questions. They've gotten too complicated. Actually, we'll get to that shortly, but this is one of the good news stories of the current year. The academic, these prestigious, quote unquote, academic institutions are losing their credibility. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Finally, they should have listened to Stephen Gaskin in the 70s. He said, a university degree is as much of a bar to enlightenment as a bad character. And he dropped his tenured professorship at the University of California and went to found a community farm in Tennessee. He got it, but that's 50 years ago almost. Maybe actually 50 years. So there are people who are getting it, but most of the people are not. They're caught up in this, a lot of the woke ideology. I think there's a talk on woke, another talk on woke on this YouTube channel. You might want to check it out. It's a huge subject and it's a huge form of corruption and problem generation. The third major problem, we'll get to the secondary ones also, try not to make this too long. The third major problem, and the Muslims generally don't have a clue really about this one, is Islamism. Luckily, I was fortunate enough to have a great Sheikh Nazim Qabrusi, Lakhani, Naqshbandi has a lot of names. But he was one of the most astute people in terms of the profundity involved in politics. And he would say at the time to Islamists, Ikhwan at the time, we didn't have the other forms. We didn't have Hamas or even Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And he would say to them, you don't understand Islam. You don't understand our religion. We are not agreeing to any ism. We are not agreeing to communism and socialism and feminism and capitalism, etc., etc. But especially, we are not agreeing to Islamism. People have the governments they deserve. And when America took out Saddam Hussein, I realized the truth, the profundity of what he was saying. I thought it would solve Iraq's problem. No, because Saddam Hussein was the government that the Iraqis merited at that point in time. So when you take them out, you just make things worse, which is what happened. So beware, the Islamists go by numerous names. We have the Wahhabis, the Salafis, the Ikhwanis, the Jamaat al-Islamiyah, and probably the worst at this point in time, the Ayatollahs of Iran, who are another form of Islamists. They have their own theory about Vilayat Faqih, which means the guardianship of the scholars, God forbid, that we be under the guardianship of scholars. Luckily, even in most Islamic countries, it's not the guardianship of the scholars, especially with the kind of scholars that are generated in a lot of the Shia world. So the Islamists, actually, which the Muslims don't understand, are more of a problem for Islam than for the other people they're attacking. Just look at the history. You can read my article also on the blog on Islamism. Over 200,000 in Algeria. Over 500,000 in Syria. These are death tolls that way outnumber whatever is going on in Palestine, even at this point, where things are very bad. 31,000 Palestinians killed by Israel between 1948 and 2020. 31,000. They may double that in the current, but that's a very unfortunate situation. But compare that to 200,000 in Algeria, 500,000 in Syria, 1.5 million in Afghanistan, 2 million in the Iran-Iraq war between two Muslims. And behind all of this, you'll find Islamists. That's the scale of the game. That's what we're dealing with now. So the Muslims are going to have to take a very serious look at this. Because Islamism is actually a derivative form of Marxism put into Islamic terms. But the Muslims haven't gotten this yet. It's a form of materialism, philosophically speaking. You change the outer, you'll change the inner. And our shuyukh taught us the opposite. You have to change the inner. And that's the way the Prophet Muhammad worked. He started with the inner. 13 years in Mecca, no structures, no institutions. Just working on the inner state of the Sahaba. That should be our model. Not China and Russia and Marx and creating a state that's somehow going to resolve the problems of its citizens, which almost never happens. So those are the three major problems. Dysfunctionality of American politics, woke, and Islamism. Then we get to the secondary ones. We have to mention them. Nationalism. That's what's behind what's going on in the Middle East now. That's what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. There are many things going on in the name of nationalism, but actually internationalism has superseded nationalism in terms of its problem creation. Even the Ukraine war, for example, you can look at it as a problem of internationalization, because NATO is what pushed Russia to attack Ukraine. There are American academics like Stephen Cohn, John Mearsheimer, they've been saying this for 20 years, but the Americans aren't listening. Okay. Nationalism, secondary. And then there's the axis of evil, which I think is, even if it comes, I think, from Bush or Reagan, it's a perfectly good concept. China, Russia, and Iran are now the axis of evil. Yes, America can be corrupt. They can do a lot of wrong things. They can also do some good things. But China, Russia, and Iran, as constituted now, are incorrigible. They're deeply corrupt. They're deeply wrong. They're, even including Iran, deeply irreligious, because they're trying to assert their authority over people, where Islam says you cannot force people to practice. In other words, you cannot, it's right in the Quran. You shouldn't force people into being good, because then they'll become hypocrites. And we all know examples of that. Okay. Three major problems: 2 secondary problems, and then people are sure to ask me, what do we do about it? Okay. The first thing always, the first part of the answer always is become aware of it, look at it, research it, think about it, get out of your echo chamber, get out of your ideological bubble, and begin to observe reality. In order to observe reality, you need 3 things. Not the intellect. The intellect will just confuse you more. 3 things you need. This is called I'll call it the Sufi epistemology here, for lack of a better term. Basira, seeing. When I saw the picture of the leader of Hamas in the Gaza, the other ones are not very good either, but just seeing him, I said, this is evil. It's obvious in his face. I think his name is Yahya Sinwar. Look at his face. Bring him up on Google and look at it. This is evil. People should be, especially Muslims, you should have some basira. You should be able to tell the difference between the people of light and the people of darkness. Most Muslims don't have a clue, honestly, between who are the people of light and who are the people of darkness. They're stuck in some ideological thing. So if anyone speaks Muslimese, like Erdogan, for example, in Turkey, they're good because they speak Islamic terms. Well, a little bit of a warning. There were a lot of people speaking Islamic terms at the time of the Prophet. They were called munafiq. I'm not saying Erdogan is a munafiq. He's an ideologue. Ideologues are dangerous. We have a whole historical record, the most recent in Egypt. They elected an Ikhwani, Mohammed Morsi. He brought the country to its knees, so much so that the army had to intervene and take over with al-Sisi. You can't even run your life, let alone a country, on the basis of ideology. You have to run it on the basis of reality. How do you get to reality? Basira, number 1. Seeing. Samia, hearing. So in the case of the Ukraine, American academics at American universities have been warning the American government for at least 20 years, don't do this. Stop putting NATO installations all along the border. Stop provoking. Someone asked Mearsheimer, did anyone ever ask you to go? He said, yeah, I was testifying. I said, what did they do about it? Nothing. Dismissed him. No, we're not going to listen to that. Even in the current climate, okay, there were lower level Israeli soldiers, women, I think, who told the upper echelons of the IDF, supposed to be so competent, that there was an attack coming. They saw all the planning and they were dismissed. Lack of samia. Samia is being able to hear the truth and then act on it. And the last part, I think there's a lot of different terms for it, but it has to do with intuition. Sometimes in Arabic it's called fuad, sometimes called ilham. Some intuitive feeling about what is really going on here. There was a famous American film with Jane Fonda in it, and they were in Germany in the 30s, and they were university students, American university students in Germany, and there's some kind of darkness inhabiting Europe now. Fuad. They were feeling it. They had the intuition. Learn to be aware of your intuition and to act on it. Thinking of some other banal example, Dolly Parton, protector, was in a film, and she meets a new guy, and she says, I have to be careful, you're the kind of guy who attracts me, but I know is going to be bad for me. But she falls for her attraction and in the end gets abused and barely escapes with her life. So her intuition, her inner voice, that's another term we could use, is telling her, Already, be careful. This is wrong. Even though you want to do it, it's wrong. So develop your intuition, your ilham, your fuad, your insight. There are probably other good Arabic words for that. But develop that sense. Seeing as things are, inner vision. Hearing with the ear of truth. And feeling with discernment. And then you'll get it right. You don't need all the data. You certainly don't need the statistical analysis. You don't need all the turning your brain into pretzels, like the academics like to do. Whenever I feel I'm listening to something, I feel my brain is turning into a pretzel, I say, this guy's lost in his mind, and I shut it off and look for something else. So, all that being said, are there any good signs? Is there anything good about the last year and upcoming year? Well, the first thing that really warmed my heart is to see these academic institutions like Harvard, MIT, University of Pennsylvania, and many others being discredited. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Finally, I think the last statistic I saw, Harvard, 17% reduction in applicants. When they get down to zero, we'll know the problem has been solved. So that's one good sign. Academic institutions being discredited. Secondly, there's a whole movement in America for freedom, freedom of choice, in medicine, in science, in beliefs, in everything, freedom. There's some group, maybe we can even call them group of schools, they're starting to form. A very good one, if anyone needs a lead, CHD, Children's Health Defense. I think it's children'shealthdefense.org, started by RFK Jr. So it's a beginning. People are doing homeschooling. People are doing permaculture. They're criticizing all this censorship, the cancel culture. So there are signs of some movement going on. In the Middle East, we had, before these current events, people talking about the Abrahamic Accords. I think that's a good start. Start working out these problems in a reasonable way rather than an emotional, ideological way. And all of these problems are actually solvable. But we need to move in the right direction, and we need to get away from our ideological bubbles, our echo chambers, our thought production, mind productions, and move towards reality. May Allah help us in this ultimately spiritual activity of getting back to reality and away from the mind. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun alal mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Thank you all and have a very good 2024. Amin.